somewhat till the third five-year plan in 1961. The fourth plan was due to start in 1966. By this time, the novelty of planning had declined considerably, and moreover, India was facing acute economic crisis. The government decided to take a plan holiday. Though many criticisms emerged both about the process and the priorities of these plans, the foundation of India's economic development was firmly in place by then. Planning Commission. Do you recall any reference to the Planning Commission in your book Constitution at Work last year? Actually, there was none, for the Planning Commission is not one of the many commissions and other bodies set up by the Constitution. The Planning Commission was set up in March 1950 by a simple resolution of the Government of India. It has an advisory role and its recommendations become effective only when the Union Cabinet approved these. The resolution which set up the Commission defined the scope of its work in the following terms. The Constitution of India has guaranteed certain fundamental rights to the citizens of India and enunciated certain directive principles of state policy, in particular, that the state shall strive to promote the welfare of the people by securing and protecting a social order in which justice, social, economic and political, shall direct its policy towards securing, among other things, that the citizens, men and women equally, have the right to an adequate means of livelihood. B. That the ownership and control of the material resources of the community are so distributed as best to subserve the common good, and C. That the operation of the economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment. Fast forward. The Government of India replaced the Planning Commission with new institutions named NITI Aayog, National Institution for Transforming India. This came into existence on January 1, 2015. Find out its objectives and compositions from the website. Decentralized planning. It is not necessary that all planning always has to be centralized, nor is it that planning is only about big industries and large projects. The Kerala model is the name given to the path of planning and development charted by the state of Kerala. There has been a focus in this model on education, health, land reform, effective food distribution, and poverty alleviation. Despite low per capita incomes, and a relatively weak industrial base, Kerala achieved nearly total literacy, long life expectancy, low infant and female mortality, low birth rates and high access to medical care. Between 1987 and 1991, the government launched the New Democratic Initiative, which involved campaigns for development, including total literacy especially in science and environment, designed to involve people directly in development activities through voluntary citizens' organizations. The state has also taken initiative to involve people in making plans at the panchayat, block and district level. Government campaign reaches the village. Extracts of translation from Rag Darbari by Shrilal Shukla. The satire is set in a village Shivpalganj in Uttar Pradesh in the 1960s. In a way, the advertisements stuck or written on walls gave an accurate introduction to the villagers' problems and how to solve them. For example, the problem was that India was a farming nation, but farmers refused to produce more grain out of sheer perversity. The solution was to give speeches to farmers and show them all sorts of attractive pictures. These advised them that if they didn't want to grow more grain for themselves, then they should do so for the nation. As a result, the posters were stuck in various places to induce farmers to grow grain for the nation. The farmers were greatly influenced by the combined effect of the speeches and posters, and even most simple-minded cultivator began to feel the likelihood of there was some ulterior motive behind the whole campaign. One advertisement had become especially well known in Shivpalganj. It showed a healthy farmer with turban wrapped around his head, earrings and a quilted jacket, cutting a tall crop of wheat with a sickle. A woman was standing behind him, very pleased with herself. She was laughing like an official from the Department of Agriculture. Below and above the picture was written in Hindi and English, "Grow more grains." Farmers with earrings and a quilted jacket who were also scholars of English were expected to be won over by the English slogans, and those who were scholars of Hindi, by the Hindi version. And those who didn't know how to read either language could at least recognize the figures of the man and the laughing woman. The government hoped that as soon as they saw the man and the laughing woman, farmer would turn away from the poster and start growing more grain like men possessed. Important personalities. 1. J.C. Kumarappa, 1892–1960, original name J.C. Cornelius, economist and chartered accountant, studied in England and USA, follower of Mahatma Gandhi, tried to apply Gandhian principles to economic policies, author of Economy of Permanence, participated in planning process as member of the Planning Commission. 2. P.C. Mahalanobis, 1893–1972. Scientist and statistician of international repute, founder of Indian Statistical Institute, 1931, architect of the Second Plan, supporter of rapid industrialization and active role of the public sector. Let's watch a film. Pather Panchali. This film tells the story of a poor family in a Bengal village and its struggle to survive. Durga, the daughter of Harihar and Sarbajaya, with her younger brother, Apu, goes on enjoying life oblivious of the struggles and the poverty. The film revolves around the simple life and the efforts of the mother of Durga and Apu to maintain the family. Pather Panchali, Song of the Little Road, narrates the desires and disappointments of the poor family through the tale of the youngsters. Finally, during monsoon, Durga falls ill and dies while her father is away. Harihar returns with gifts, including a sari for Durga. The film won numerous awards nationally and internationally, including the President's Gold and Silver Medals for the year 1955. Year, 1955. Director, Satyajit Ray. Story, Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. Screenplay, Satyajit Ray. Actors, Kanu Banerjee, Karuna Banerjee, Subir Banerjee, Uma Das Gupta Durga, Chunabala Devi. Newspaper extracts. Orissa villagers protest against POSCO plant. Staff reporter. Bhubaneswar, people facing displacement by the proposed POSCO India steel plant in Jagatsinghpur district staged a demonstration outside the Korean company's office here on Thursday. They were demanding cancellation of the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the company and the Orissa government 1 year ago. More than 100 men and women from the Gram Panchayats of Dinkia, Nuagan and Gadakujenga tried to enter the office premises but the police prevented them. Raising slogans, the protesters said the company should not be allowed to set up its plant at the cost of their lives and livelihood. The demonstration was organized by the Rashtriya Yuva Sangathan and the Nabinarman Samiti. The Hindu, the 23rd of June 2006. Let us research. Srikanth still remembers the struggle his elder brother had to undergo in order to get the monthly supply of ration for the ration shop. Their family was totally dependent on the supplies from the ration shop for rice, oil and kerosene. Many times, his brother would stand in the queue for an hour or so only to find out that the supply had ended and he would have to come later when fresh supply arrives. Find out from talking to elders in your family what is a ration card and ask your elders what, if any, items they buy from the ration shop. Visit a ration shop in the vicinity of your school or home and find out what is the difference in the prices of at least 3 commodities, wheat, rice, cooking oil, sugar, between the ration shop and the open market. Chapter 4. India's External Relations. In this chapter, thus far we have focused in this book on the developments within the country and on domestic challenges. We now turn to the external challenges. Here too our leaders faced the challenge with an innovative response by way of the policy of non-alignment. But they also found themselves in conflict with neighbors. This led to 3 wars in 1962, 1965 and 1971. These wars, and the external relations in general, were shaped by and had its impact on the politics in the country. In this chapter we study the story of this relationship between the external and the internal politics by focusing on 1. The international context that shaped India's external relations. 2. The operational principles that informed the country's foreign policy. 3. The history of India's relations with China and Pakistan, and 4. The evolution of India's nuclear policy. International context. India was born in a very trying and challenging international context. The world had witnessed a devastating war and was grappling with issues of reconstruction. Yet another attempt to establish an international body was underway. Many new countries were emerging as a result of the collapse of colonialism, and most new nations were trying to come to terms with the twin challenges of welfare and democracy. Free India's foreign policy reflected all these concerns in the period immediately after independence. Apart from these factors at the global level, India had its own share of concerns. The British government left behind the legacy of many international disputes, partition created its own pressures, and the task of poverty alleviation was already waiting for fulfillment. This was the overall context in which India started participating in the world affairs as an independent nation-state. As a nation born in the backdrop of the World War, India decided to conduct its foreign relations with an aim to respect the sovereignty of all other nations and to achieve security through the maintenance of peace. This aim finds an echo in the directive principles of state policy. Just as both internal and external factors guide the behavior of an individual or a family, both domestic and international environment influence the foreign policy of a nation. The developing countries lack the required resources to effectively advocate their concerns in the international system. So they pursue more modest goals than the advanced states. They focus more on peace and development in their own neighborhood. Moreover, their economic and security dependence on the more powerful states occasionally influences their foreign policy. In the period immediately after the Second World War, many developing nations chose to support the foreign policy preferences of the powerful countries who were giving them aid or credits. This resulted in the division of countries of the world into two clear camps. One was under the influence of the United States and its Western allies, and the other was under the influence of the then Soviet Union. You have read about this in the book on contemporary world politics. You have read there about the experiment called the non-aligned movement. As you also read there, the end of the Cold War changed the context of international relations entirely. But when India achieved its freedom and started framing its foreign policy, the Cold War was just beginning and the world was getting divided into these two camps. Did India belong to any of these two camps in global politics of the 50s and the 60s? Was it successful in conducting its foreign policy peacefully and avoiding international conflicts? The Constitutional Principles. Article 51 of the Indian Constitution lays down some directive principles of state policy on promotion of international peace and security. The state shall endeavor to a. Promote international peace and security. B. Maintain just and honorable relations between nations. C. Foster respect for international law and treaty obligations in the dealings of organized people with one another, and D. Encourage settlement of international disputes by arbitration. How well did the Indian state live up to these principles in the first 2 decades after independence? You may come back to this question after reading the chapter. Policy of non-alignment. The Indian national movement was not an isolated process. It was a part of the worldwide struggle against colonialism and imperialism. It influenced the liberation movements of many Asian and African countries. Prior to India's independence, there were contacts between the nationalist leaders of India and those of other colonies, united as they were in their common struggle against colonialism and imperialism. The creation of the Indian National Army, INA, by Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose during the Second World War was the clearest manifestation of the linkages established between India and overseas Indians during the freedom struggle. The foreign policy of a nation reflects the interplay of domestic and external factors. Therefore, the noble ideals that inspired India's struggle for freedom influenced the making of its foreign policy. But India's attainment of independence coincided with the beginning of the Cold War era. As you read in the first chapter of the book on contemporary world politics, this period was marked by the political, economic, and military confrontation at the global level between the two blocs led by the superpowers, the US and the USSR. The same period also witnessed developments like the establishment of the UN, the creation of nuclear weapons, the emergence of Communist China, and the beginning of decolonization. So India's leadership had to pursue its national interests within the prevailing international context. Nehru's role. The first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, played a crucial role in setting the national agenda. He was his own foreign minister. Thus, both as the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, he exercised profound influence in the formulation and implementation of India's foreign policy from 1946 to 1964. The three major objectives of Nehru's foreign policy were to preserve the hard-earned sovereignty, protect territorial integrity, and promote rapid economic development. Nehru wished to achieve these objectives through the strategy of non-alignment. There were of course parties and groups in the country that believed that India should be more friendly with the bloc led by US because that bloc claimed to be pro-democracy. Among those who thought on these lines were leaders like Dr. Ambedkar. Some political parties, which were opposed to communism, also wanted India to follow a pro-US foreign policy. These included the Bharatiya Jan Sangh and later the Swatantra Party. But Nehru possessed considerable leeway in formulating the foreign policy. Distance from two camps. The foreign policy of independent India vigorously pursued the dream of a peaceful world by advocating the policy of non-alignment, by reducing the Cold War tensions and by contributing human resources to the UN peacekeeping operations. You might ask why India did not join either of the two camps during the Cold War era. India wanted to keep away from the military alliances led by US and Soviet Union against each other. As you have read in the book on contemporary world politics, during the Cold War, the US-led North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and the Soviet-led Warsaw Pact came into existence. India advocated non-alignment as the ideal foreign policy approach. This was a difficult balancing act and sometimes the balance did not appear perfect. In 1956, when Britain attacked Egypt over the Suez Canal issue, India led the world protest against this neo-colonial invasion. But in the same year when the USSR invaded Hungary, India did not join its public condemnation. Despite such situation, by and large India did take an independent stand on various international issues and could get aid and assistance from members of both the blocs. While India was trying to convince the other developing countries about the policy of non-alignment, Pakistan joined the US-led military alliances. The US was not happy about India's independent initiatives and the policy of non-alignment. Therefore, there was a considerable unease in Indo-US relations during the 1950s. The US also resented India's growing partnership with the Soviet Union. You have studied in the last chapter, the strategy of planned economic development adopted by India. This policy emphasized import substitution. The emphasis on developing a resource base also meant that export-oriented growth was limited. This development strategy limited India's economic interaction with the outside world. Afro-Asian unity. Yet, given its size, location and power potential, Nehru envisaged a major role for India in world affairs and especially in Asian affairs. His era was marked by the establishment of contacts between India and other newly independent states in Asia and Africa. Throughout the 1940s and 1950s, Nehru had been an ardent advocate of Asian unity. Under his leadership, India convened the Asian Relations Conference in March 1947, 5 months ahead of attaining its independence. India made earnest efforts for the early realization of freedom of Indonesia from the Dutch colonial regime by convening an international conference in 1949 to support its freedom struggle. India was a staunch supporter of the decolonization process and firmly opposed racism, especially apartheid in South Africa. The Afro-Asian Conference held in the Indonesian city of Bandung in 1955, commonly known as the Bandung Conference, marked the zenith of India's engagement with the newly independent Asian and African nations. The Bandung Conference later led to the establishment of the NAM. The first summit of the NAM was held in Belgrade in September 1961. Nehru was a co-founder of the NAM, see Chapter 1 of Contemporary World Politics. Peace and conflict with China. Unlike its relationship with Pakistan, Free India began its relationship with China on a very friendly note. After the Chinese Revolution in 1949, India was one of the first countries to recognize the communist government. Nehru felt strongly for this neighbor that was coming out of the shadow of Western domination and helped the new government in international fora. Some of his colleagues, like Vallabhbhai Patel, were worried about a possible Chinese aggression in future. But Nehru thought it was exceedingly unlikely that India will face an attack from China. For a very long time, the Chinese border was guarded by paramilitary forces, not the army. The joint enunciation of Panchali, the Five Principles of Peaceful Coexistence, by the Indian Prime Minister Nehru and the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai on 29 April 1954 was a step in the direction of stronger relationship between the two countries. Indian and Chinese leaders visited each other's country and were greeted by large and friendly crowds. The Chinese invasion, 1962. Two developments strained this relationship. China annexed Tibet in 1950 and thus removed a historical buffer between the two countries. Initially, the government of India did not oppose this openly. But as more information came in about the suppression of Tibetan culture, the Indian government grew uneasy. The Tibetan spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, sought and obtained political asylum in India in 1959. China alleged that the government of India was allowing anti-China activities to take place from within India. A little earlier, a boundary dispute had surfaced between India and China. India claimed that the boundary was a matter settled in colonial time, but China said that any colonial decision did not apply. The main dispute was about the western and the eastern end of the long border. China claimed two areas within the Indian territory, Haqeeqat area in the Ladakh region of Jammu and Kashmir and much of the state of Arunachal Pradesh in what was then called NIFA, Northeastern Frontier Agency. Between 1957 and 1959, the Chinese occupied the Haqeeqat area and built a strategic road there. Despite a very long correspondence and discussion among top leaders, these differences could not be resolved. Several small border skirmishes between the armies of the two countries took place. Do you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis in Chapter 1 of the Contemporary World Politics? While the entire world's attention was on this crisis involving the two superpowers, China launched a swift and massive invasion in October 1962 on both the disputed regions. The first attack lasted 1 week and Chinese forces captured some key areas in Arunachal Pradesh. The second wave of attack came next month. While the Indian forces could block the Chinese advances on the western front in Ladakh, in the east the Chinese managed to advance nearly to the entry point of Assam Plains. Finally, China declared a unilateral ceasefire and its troops withdrew to where they were before the invasion began. The China War dented India's image at home and abroad. India had to approach the Americans and the British for military assistance to tide over the crisis. The Soviet Union remained neutral during the conflict. It induced a sense of national humiliation and at the same time strengthened a spirit of nationalism. Some of the top army commanders either resigned or were retired. Nehru's close associate and the then defense minister, V. Krishna Menon, had to leave the cabinet. Nehru's own stature suffered as he was severely criticized for his naive assessment of the Chinese intentions and the lack of military preparedness. For the first time, a no-confidence motion against his government was moved and debated in the Lok Sabha. Soon thereafter, the Congress lost some key by-elections to Lok Sabha. The political mood of the country had begun to change. The Sino-Indian conflict affected the opposition as well. This and the growing rift between China and the Soviet Union created irreconcilable differences within the Communist Party of India (CPI). The pro-USSR faction remained within the CPI and moved towards closer ties with the Congress. The other faction was for some time closer to China and was against any ties with the Congress. The party split in 1964 and the leaders of the latter faction formed Communist Party of India (Marxist CPIM). In the wake of China War, many leaders of what became CPI-M were arrested for being pro-China. The war with China alerted Indian leadership to the volatile situation in the northeast region. Apart from being isolated and extremely underdeveloped, this region also presented India with the challenge of national integration and political unity. The process of its reorganization began soon after the China War. Nagaland was granted statehood. Manipur and Tripura, though union territories, were given the right to elect their own legislative assemblies. Fast forward. It took more than a decade for India and China to resume normal relations. It was in 1976 that full diplomatic relations were restored between the two countries. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the first top-level leader, he was then External Affairs Minister, to visit China in 1979. Later, Rajiv Gandhi became the first Prime Minister after Nehru to visit China. Since then, the emphasis is more on trade relations between the two countries. In the book, Contemporary World Politics, you have already read about these developments. India's external relations. Tibet. The plateau of the Central Asian region called Tibet is one of the major issues that historically caused tension between India and China. From time to time in history, China had claimed administrative control over Tibet. And from time to time, Tibet was independent too. In 1950, China took over control of Tibet. Large sections of the Tibetan population opposed this takeover. India tried to persuade China to recognize Tibet's claims for independence. When the Panchali Agreement was signed between India and China in 1954, through one of its clauses about respecting each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, India conceded China's claim over Tibet. The Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama accompanied the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai during the official Chinese visit to India in 1956. He informed Nehru about the worsening situation in Tibet. But China had already assured India that Tibet will be given greater autonomy than enjoyed by any other region of China. In 1958, there was armed uprising in Tibet against China's occupation. This was suppressed by the Chinese forces. Sensing that the situation had become worse, in 1959, the Dalai Lama crossed over into the Indian border and sought asylum, which was granted. The Chinese government strongly protested against this. Over the last half-century, a large number of Tibetans have also sought refuge in India and many other countries of the world. In India, particularly in Delhi, there are large settlements of Tibetan refugees. Dharmashala in Himachal Pradesh is perhaps the largest refuge settlement of Tibetans in India. The Dalai Lama has also made Dharmashala his home in India. In the 1950s and 1960s, many political leaders and parties in India, including the Socialist Party and the Jan Sangh, supported the cause of Tibet's independence. China has created the Tibet Autonomous Region, which is an integral part of China. Tibetans oppose the Chinese claim that Tibet is part of Chinese territory. They also oppose the policy of bringing into Tibet more and more Chinese settlers. Tibetans dispute China's claim that autonomy is granted to the region. They think that China wants to undermine the traditional religion and culture of Tibet. Wars and peace with Pakistan. In the case of Pakistan, the conflict started just after partition over the dispute on Kashmir. You will read more about the dispute in Chapter 8. A proxy war broke out between Indian and Pakistani army in Kashmir during 1947 itself. But this did not turn into a full war. The issue was then referred to the UN. Pakistan soon emerged as a critical factor in India's relations with the US and subsequently with China. The Kashmir conflict did not prevent cooperation between the governments of India and Pakistan. Both the governments worked together to restore the women abducted during partition to their original families. A long-term dispute about the sharing of river waters was resolved through mediation by the World Bank. The India-Pakistan Indus Waters Treaty was signed by Nehru and General Ayub Khan in 1960. Despite all ups and downs in the Indo-Pak relations, this treaty has worked well. A more serious armed conflict between the two countries began in 1965. As you would read in the next chapter, by then Lal Bahadur Shastri had taken over as the Prime Minister. In April 1965, Pakistan launched armed attacks in the Ran of Kutch area of Gujarat. This was followed by a bigger offensive in Jammu and Kashmir in August-September. Pakistani rulers were hoping to get support from the local population there, but it did not happen. In order to ease the pressure on the Kashmir front, Shastri ordered Indian troops to launch a counter-offensive on the Punjab border. In a fierce battle, the Indian army reached close to Lahore. The hostilities came to an end with the UN intervention. Later, Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri and Pakistan's General Ayub Khan signed the Tashkent Agreement, brokered by the Soviet Union, in January 1966. Though India could inflict considerable military loss on Pakistan, the 1965 war added to India's already difficult economic situation. Bangladesh War, 1971. Beginning in 1970, Pakistan faced its biggest internal crisis. The country's first general election produced a split verdict. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's party emerged a winner in West Pakistan, while the Awami League led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman swept through East Pakistan. The Bengali population of East Pakistan had voted to protest against years of being treated as second-class citizens by the rulers based in West Pakistan. The Pakistani rulers were not willing to accept the democratic verdict. Nor were they ready to accept the Awami League's demand for a federation. Instead, in early 1971, the Pakistani army arrested Sheikh Mujib and unleashed a reign of terror on the people of East Pakistan. In response to this, the people started a struggle to liberate Bangladesh from Pakistan. Throughout 1971, India had to bear the burden of about 80 lakh refugees who fled East Pakistan and took shelter in the neighboring areas in India. India extended moral and material support to the freedom struggle in Bangladesh. Pakistan accused India of a conspiracy to break it up. Support for Pakistan came from the US and China. The US-China rapprochement that began in the late 1960s resulted in a realignment of forces in Asia. Henry Kissinger, the advisor to the U.S. President Richard Nixon, made a secret visit to China via Pakistan in July 1971. In order to counter the US-Pakistan-China axis, India signed a 20-year treaty of peace and friendship with the Soviet Union in August 1971. This treaty assured India of Soviet support if the country faced any attack. After months of diplomatic tension and military buildup, a full-scale war between India and Pakistan broke out in December 1971. Pakistani aircrafts attacked Punjab and Rajasthan, while the army moved on the Jammu and Kashmir front. India retaliated with an attack involving the Air Force, Navy and the Army on both the Western and the Eastern Front. Welcomed and supported by the local population, the Indian Army made rapid progress in East Pakistan. Within 10 days the Indian Army had surrounded Dhaka from three sides and the Pakistani army of about 90,000 had to surrender. With Bangladesh as a free country, India declared a unilateral ceasefire. Later, the signing of the Shimla Agreement between Indira Gandhi and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto on 3 July 1972 formalized the return of peace. A decisive victory in the war led to national jubilation. Most people in India saw this as a moment of glory and a clear sign of India's growing military prowess. As you would read in the next chapter, Indira Gandhi was the prime minister at this time. She had already won the Lok Sabha elections in 1971. Her personal popularity soared further after the 1971 war. After the war, assembly elections in most states took place, bringing large majorities for the Congress Party in many states. India, with its limited resources, had initiated development planning. However, conflicts with neighbors derailed the 5-year plans. The scarce resources were diverted to the defense sector, especially after 1962, as India had to embark on a military modernization drive. The Department of Defense Production was established in November 1962 and the Department of Defense Supplies in November 1965. The third plan, 1961-66, was effected and it was followed by 3 annual plans, and the fourth plan could be initiated only in 1969. India's defense expenditure increased enormously after the wars. Fast forward, Kargil confrontation. In the early part of 1999, several points on the Indian side of the lock in the Mashko, Dras, Kaksar and Batalik areas were occupied by forces claiming to be Mujahideens. Suspecting involvement of the Pakistan Army, Indian forces started reacting to this occupation. This led to a confrontation between the two countries. This is known as the Kargil conflict. This conflict went on during May and June 1999. By the 26th of July 1999, India had recovered control of many of the lost points. The Kargil conflict drew attention worldwide for the reason that only 1 year prior to that, both India and Pakistan had attained nuclear capability. However, this conflict remained confined only to the Kargil region. In Pakistan, this conflict has been the source of a major controversy, as it was alleged later that the Prime Minister of Pakistan was kept in the dark by the army chief. Soon after the conflict, the government of Pakistan was taken over by the Pakistan Army led by the Army Chief, General Parvez Musharraf. India's nuclear policy. Another crucial development of this period was the first nuclear explosion undertaken by India in May 1974. Nehru had always put his faith in science and technology for rapidly building a modern India. A significant component of his industrialization plans was the nuclear program initiated in the late 1940s under the guidance of Homi J. Bhabha. India wanted to generate atomic energy for peaceful purposes. Nehru was against nuclear weapons. So he pleaded with the superpowers for comprehensive nuclear disarmament. However, the nuclear arsenal kept rising. When Communist China conducted nuclear tests in October 1964, the 5 nuclear weapon powers, the US, USSR, UK, France, China, also the 5 permanent members of UN Council, tried to impose the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, of 1968 on the rest of the world. India always considered the NPT as discriminatory and had refused to sign it. When India conducted its first nuclear test, it was termed as peaceful explosion. India argued that it was committed to the policy of using nuclear power only for peaceful purposes. The period when the nuclear test was conducted was a difficult period in domestic politics. Following the Arab-Israel War of 1973, the entire world was affected by the oil shock due to the massive hike in the oil prices by the Arab nations. It led to economic turmoil in India, resulting in high inflation. As you will read in Chapter 6, many agitations were going on in the country around this time, including a nationwide railway strike. Although there are minor differences among political parties about how to conduct external relations, Indian politics is generally marked by a broad agreement among the parties on national integration, protection of international boundaries, and on questions of national interest. Therefore, we find that in the course of the decade of 1962–1972, when India faced 3 wars, or even later, when different parties came to power from time to time, foreign policy has played only a limited role in party politics. Fast forward, India's nuclear program. India has opposed the international treaties aimed at non-proliferation since they were selectively applicable to the non-nuclear powers and legitimized the monopoly of the 5 nuclear weapons powers. Thus, India opposed the indefinite extension of the NPT in 1995 and also refused to sign the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty (CTBT). India conducted a series of nuclear tests in May 1998, demonstrating its capacity to use nuclear energy for military purposes. Pakistan soon followed, thereby increasing the vulnerability of the region to a nuclear exchange. The international community was extremely critical of the nuclear tests in the subcontinent, and sanctions were imposed on both India and Pakistan, which were subsequently waived. India's nuclear doctrine of credible minimum nuclear deterrence professes no first use, and reiterates India's commitment to global, verifiable and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament leading to a nuclear weapons-free world. Let US watch a movie. Haqeeqat. A small platoon of Indian Army is rescued by the Gypsies in Ladakh region. The enemy has surrounded their post. Capt. Bahadur Singh and his gypsy girlfriend Camo help the Jawans vacate their posts. Both Bahadur Singh and Camo die while holding the Chinese, but the Jawans too are outpowered by the enemy and lay down their lives for the country. Set in the backdrop of the China War of 1962, this film portrays the soldier and his travails as its central theme. It pays tribute to the soldiers while depicting their plight, and the political frustration over the betrayal by the Chinese. The film uses documentary footage of war scenes and is considered as one of the early war films made in Hindi. Year, 1964. Director, Chetan Anand. Actors: Dharmendra, Priya, Rajvash, Balraj Sani, Jayant, Sudhir, Sanjay Khan, Vijay, Anand. Shifting alliances in world politics. As you will read in Chapter 6 and also in Chapter 9, many non-Congress governments came to power in the period starting 1977. This was also the time when world politics was changing dramatically. What did it mean for the Janata Party government that came to power in 1977 announced that it would follow genuine non-alignment. This implied that the pro-Soviet tilt in the foreign policy will be corrected. Since then, all governments, Congress or non-Congress, have taken initiatives for restoring better relations with China and entering into close ties with U.S. In Indian politics and in popular mind, India's foreign policy is always very closely linked to two questions. One is India's stand vis-a-vis Pakistan and the other is Indo-US relations. In the post-1990 period, the ruling parties have often been criticized for their pro-US foreign policy. Foreign policy is always dictated by ideas of national interest. In the period after 1990, Russia, though it continues to be an important friend of India, has lost its global preeminence. Therefore, India's foreign policy has shifted to a more pro-US strategy. Besides, the contemporary international situation is more influenced by economic interests than by military interests. This has also made an impact on India's foreign policy choices. At the same time, Indo-Pakistan relations have witnessed many new developments during this period. While Kashmir continues to be the main issue between the two countries, there have been many efforts to restore normal relations. This means that cultural exchanges, movement of citizens and economic cooperation would be encouraged by both countries. Do you know that a train and a bus service operate between these two countries? This has been a major achievement of the recent times. But that could not avoid the near-war situation from emerging in 1999. Even after this setback to the peace process, efforts at negotiating durable peace have been going on. Important personalities. 1. V.K. Krishna Menon, 1897–1974. Diplomat and minister, active in the Labour Party in UK between 1934–1947, Indian High Commissioner in UK and later head of India's delegation to UN, Rajya Sabha MP and later Lok Sabha MP, member of the Union Cabinet from 1956, Defence Minister since 1957, considered very close to Nehru, resigned after the India-China War in 1962. Quotes. 1. What does independence consist of? It consists fundamentally and basically of foreign relations. That is the test of independence. All else is local autonomy. Once foreign relations go out of your hands into the charge of somebody else, to that extent and in that measure you are not independent. Jawaharlal Nehru during a debate in the Constituent Assembly in March 1949. Chapter 5. Challenges to and restoration of the Congress system. In this chapter. In Chapter 2 we read about the emergence of the Congress system. This system was first challenged during the 1960s. As political competition became more intense, the Congress found it difficult to retain its dominance. It faced challenges from the opposition that was more powerful and less divided than before. The Congress also faced challenges from within, as the party could no longer accommodate all kinds of differences. In this chapter we pick the story from where we left it in Chapter 2, in order to 1. Understand how the political transition took place after Nehru. 2. Describe how the opposition unity and the Congress split posed a challenge to Congress dominance. 3. Explain how a new Congress led by Indira Gandhi overcame these challenges, and 4. Analyze how new policies and ideologies facilitated the restoration of the Congress system. Challenge of political succession. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru passed away in May 1964. He had been unwell for more than a year. This had generated a lot of speculation about the usual question of succession, after Nehru, who? But in a newly independent country like India, this situation gave rise to a more serious question, after Nehru, what? The second question arose from the serious doubts that many outsiders had about whether India's democratic experiment will survive after Nehru. It was feared that, like so many other newly independent countries, India too would not be able to manage a democratic succession. A failure to do so, it was feared, could lead to a political role for the army. Besides, there were doubts if the new leadership would be able to handle the multiple crises that awaited a solution. The 1960s were labeled as the dangerous decade, when unresolved problems like poverty, inequality, communal and regional divisions etc. could lead to a failure of the democratic project or even the disintegration of the country. From Nehru to Shastri. The ease with which the succession after Nehru took place proved all the critics wrong. When Nehru passed away, K. Kamraj, the president of the Congress Party, consulted party leaders and Congress members of parliament and found that there was a consensus in favor of Lal Bahadur Shastri. He was unanimously chosen as the leader of the Congress Parliamentary Party and thus became the country's next prime minister. Shastri was a non-controversial leader from Uttar Pradesh who had been a minister in Nehru's cabinet for many years. Nehru had come to depend a lot on him in his last year. He was known for his simplicity and his commitment to principles. Earlier he had resigned from the position of railway minister, accepting moral responsibility for a major railway accident. Shastri was the country's prime minister from 1964 to 1966. During Shastri's brief prime ministership, the country faced two major challenges. While India was still recovering from the economic implications of the war with China, failed monsoons, drought and serious food crisis presented a grave challenge. As discussed in the previous chapter, the country also faced a war with Pakistan in 1965. Shastri's famous slogan, Jai Jawan Jai Kisan, symbolized the country's resolve to face both these challenges. Shastri's prime ministership came to an abrupt end on 10 January 1966, when he suddenly expired in Tashkent, then in USSR and currently the capital of Uzbekistan. He was there to discuss and sign an agreement with Muhammad Ayub Khan, the then president of Pakistan, to end the war. From Shastri to Indira Gandhi. Thus the Congress faced the challenge of political succession for the second time in 2 years. This time there was an intense competition between Morarji Desai and Indira Gandhi. Morarji Desai had earlier served as Chief Minister of Bombay State, today's Maharashtra and Gujarat, and also as a minister at the centre. Indira Gandhi, the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, had been Congress president in the past and had also been Union Minister for Information in the Shastri cabinet. This time the senior leaders in the party decided to back Indira Gandhi, but the decision was not unanimous. The contest was resolved through a secret ballot among Congress MPs. Indira Gandhi defeated Morarji Desai by securing the support of more than two-thirds of the party's MPs. A peaceful transition of power, despite intense competition for leadership, was seen as a sign of maturity of India's democracy. It took some time before the new prime minister could settle down. While Indira Gandhi had been politically active for very long, she had served as a minister under Lal Bahadur Shastri only for a short period. The senior Congress leaders may have supported Indira Gandhi in the belief that her administrative and political inexperience would compel her to be dependent on them for support and guidance. Within a year of becoming prime minister, Indira Gandhi had to lead the party in a Lok Sabha election. Around this time, the economic situation in the country had further deteriorated, adding to her problems. Faced with these difficulties, she set out to gain control over the party and to demonstrate her leadership skills. Fourth General Elections, 1967. The year 1967 is considered a landmark year in India's political and electoral history. In Chapter 2 you read about how the Congress Party was the dominant political force throughout the country from 1952 onwards. This trend was to undergo significant changes with the 1967 elections. Context of the elections. In the years leading up to the fourth general elections, the country witnessed major changes. Two prime ministers had died in quick succession, and the new prime minister, who was being seen as a political novice, had been in office for less than a year. You will recall from the discussion in Chapter 3 and in the previous section of this chapter that the period was fraught with grave economic crisis resulting from successive failure of monsoons, widespread drought, decline in agricultural production, serious food shortage, depletion of foreign exchange reserves, drop in industrial production and exports, combined with a sharp rise in military expenditure and diversion of resources from planning and economic development. One of the first decisions of the Indira Gandhi government was to devaluate the Indian rupee, under what was seen to be pressure from the U.S. Earlier $1 could be purchased for less than Rs. 5. After devaluation it cost more than Rs. 7. The economic situation triggered off-price rise. People started protesting against the increase in prices of essential commodities, food scarcity, growing unemployment and the overall economic condition in the country. Bans and hurdles were called frequently across the country. The government saw the protests as a law and order problem and not as expressions of people's problems. This further increased public bitterness and reinforced popular unrest. The Communist and Socialist parties launched struggles for greater equality. You will read in the next chapter about how a group of communists who separated from the Communist Party of India, Marxist, to form the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, led armed agrarian struggles and organized peasant agitations. This period also witnessed some of the worst Hindu-Muslim riots since independence. Election in a Rajasthan village. This is a story about 1967 assembly elections. In the Chomu constituency, the main parties in the fray were Congress and the Swatantra Party. But village Devasar had its own local political dynamics and it got mixed up with the competition between the two parties. Sher Singh traditionally dominated village politics, but gradually his nephew, Bhim Singh, was emerging as the more popular leader and rival. Though both were Rajputs, Bhim Singh cultivated the support of many non-Rajputs in the village by attending to their requirements after becoming the Panchayat Pradhan. So, he struck a new equation, the alliance of Rajputs and non-Rajputs. He proved to be more adept in building alliances across the village by supporting candidates in other villages for the posts of village Pradhan. In fact, he took an initiative and took a delegation to the state chief minister and Congress leader Mohan Lal Sukhadia for pressing the name of one of his friends from a nearby village as Congress candidate in the assembly election. When Sukhadia convinced him of some other name, Bhim Singh, in turn, convinced many others that they should work for the party candidate. Bhim Singh knew that if the party candidate won from this constituency, that candidate would become a minister and thus, he would have direct contacts with a minister for the first time. Sher Singh had no option but to work for the Swatantra candidate, who was a Jagirdar. He kept telling people that the Jagirdar would help build the village school and use his resources for the development of the locality. At least in Devasar village, the assembly election had turned into a factional fight between uncle and nephew. Based on Anand Chakravarti, a village in Chomu assembly constituency in Rajasthan. Non-Congressism. This situation could not have remained isolated from party politics in the country. Opposition parties were in the forefront of organizing public protests and pressurizing the government. Parties opposed to the Congress realized that the division of their votes kept the Congress in power. Thus parties that were entirely different and disparate in their programs and ideology got together to form anti-Congress fronts in some states and entered into electoral adjustments of sharing seats in others. They felt that the inexperience of Indira Gandhi and the internal factionalism within the Congress provided them an opportunity to topple the Congress. The socialist leader Ram Manohar Lohia gave this strategy the name of non-Congressism. He also produced a theoretical argument in its defense. Congress rule was undemocratic and opposed to the interests of ordinary poor people, therefore, the coming together of the non-Congress parties was necessary for reclaiming democracy for the people. Electoral verdict. It was in this context of heightened popular discontent and the polarization of political forces that the fourth general elections to the Lok Sabha and state assemblies were held in February 1967. The Congress was facing the electorate for the first time without Nehru. The results jolted the Congress at both the national and state levels. Many contemporary political observers described the election results as a political earthquake. The Congress did manage to get a majority in the Lok Sabha, but with its lowest tally of seats and share of votes since 1952. Half the ministers in Indira Gandhi's cabinet were defeated. The political stalwarts who lost in their constituencies included Kamaraj in Tamil Nadu, S.K. Patil in Maharashtra, Atulya Ghosh in West Bengal and K.B. Sahai in Bihar. The dramatic nature of the political change would be more apparent to you at the state level. The Congress lost majority in as many as 7 states. In 2 other states, defections prevented it from forming a government. These 9 states where the Congress lost power were spread across the country: Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal, Orissa, Madras and Kerala. In Madras state, now called Tamil Nadu, a regional party, the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam (DMK), came to power by securing a clear majority. The DMK won power after having led a massive anti-Hindi agitation by students against the center on the issue of imposition of Hindi as the official language. This was the first time any non-Congress party had secured a majority of its own in any state. In the other 8 states, coalition governments consisting of different non-Congress parties were formed. A popular saying was that one could take a train from Delhi to Howrah and not pass through a single Congress-ruled state. It was a strange feeling for those who were used to seeing the Congress in power. So, was the domination of the Congress over? Coalitions. The elections of 1967 brought into picture the phenomenon of coalitions. Since no single party had got majority, various non-Congress parties came together to form joint legislative parties called Samyukt Vidhayak Dal in Hindi that supported non-Congress governments. That is why these governments came to be described as SVD governments. In most of these cases, the coalition partners were ideologically incongruent. The SVD government in Bihar, for instance, included the 2 socialist parties, SSP and the PSP, along with the CPI on the left and Jana Sangh on the right. In Punjab it was called the Popular United Front, and comprised the 2 rival Akali parties at that time, San Group and the Master Group, with both the communist parties, the CPI and the CPI-M, the SSP, the Republican Party and the Bharatiya Jana Sangh. Defection. Another important feature of the politics after the 1967 election was the role played by defections in the making and unmaking of governments in the states. Defection means an elected representative leaves the party on whose symbol she was elected and joins another party. After the 1967 general election, the breakaway Congress legislators played an important role in installing non-Congress governments in 3 states, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. The constant realignments and shifting political loyalties in this period gave rise to the expression, Iya Ram, Gaya Ram. The story of Iya Ram, Gaya Ram, the expression, Iya Ram, Gaya Ram, became popular in the political vocabulary in India to describe the practice of frequent floor crossing by legislators. Literally translated, the terms meant, Ram came and Ram went. The expression originated in an amazing feat of floor crossing achieved by Gaya Lal, an MLA in Haryana, in 1967. He changed his party thrice in a fortnight, from Congress to United Front, back to Congress and then within 9 hours to United Front again. It is said that when Gaya Lal declared his intention to quit the United Front and join the Congress leader, Rao Birendra Singh brought him to Chandigarh press and declared Gaya Ram was now Iya Ram. Gaya Lal's feat was immortalized in the phrase, Iya Ram, Gaya Ram, which became the subject of numerous jokes and cartoons. Later, the Constitution was amended to prevent defections. Split in the Congress. We saw that after the 1967 elections, the Congress retained power at the center but with a reduced majority and lost power in many states. More importantly, the results proved that the Congress could be defeated at the elections. But there was no substitute as yet. Most non-Congress coalition governments in the states did not survive for long. They lost majority, and either new combinations were formed or president's rule had to be imposed. Indira versus the syndicate. The real challenge to Indira Gandhi came not from the opposition but from within her own party. She had to deal with the syndicate, a group of powerful and influential leaders from within the Congress. The syndicate had played a role in the installation of Indira Gandhi as the Prime Minister by ensuring her election as the leader of the parliamentary party. These leaders expected Indira Gandhi to follow their advice. Gradually, however, Indira Gandhi attempted to assert her position within the government and the party. She chose her trusted group of advisors from outside the party. Slowly and carefully, she sidelined the syndicate. Indira Gandhi thus faced two challenges. She needed to build her independence from the syndicate. She also needed to work towards regaining the ground that the Congress had lost in the 1967 elections. Indira Gandhi adopted a very bold strategy. She converted a simple power struggle into an ideological struggle. She launched a series of initiatives to give the government policy a left orientation. She got the Congress Working Committee to adopt a 10-point program in May 1967. This program included social control of banks, nationalization of general insurance, ceiling on urban property and income, public distribution of food grains, land reforms and provision of house sites to the rural poor. While the syndicate leaders formally approved this left-wing program, they had serious reservations about the same. The Congress Syndicate. Syndicate was the informal name given to a group of Congress leaders who were in control of the party's organization. It was led by K. Kamraj, former Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu and then the President of the Congress Party. It included powerful state leaders like S. K. Patil of Bombay City, later named as Mumbai, S. Nijalingappa of Mysore, later Karnataka, N. Sanjeeva Reddy of Andhra Pradesh and Atulya Ghosh of West Bengal. Both Lal Bahadur Shastri and later Indira Gandhi owed their position to the support received from the syndicate. This group had a decisive say in Indira Gandhi's first Council of Ministers and also in policy formulation and implementation. After the Congress split, the leaders of the syndicate and those owing allegiance to them stayed with the Congress. Since it was Indira Gandhi's Congress, that won the test of popularity, all these big and powerful men of Indian politics lost their power and prestige after 1971. Presidential election, 1969. The factional rivalry between the syndicate and Indira Gandhi came in the open in 1969. Following President Zakir Husain's death, the post of President of the India fell vacant that year. Despite Mrs. Gandhi's reservations, the syndicate managed to nominate her longtime opponent and then Speaker of the Lok Sabha, N. Sanjeeva Reddy, as the official Congress candidate for the ensuing presidential elections. Indira Gandhi retaliated by encouraging the then Vice President, V.V. Giri, to file his nomination as an independent candidate. She also announced several big and popular policy measures like the nationalization of 14 leading private banks and the abolition of the Privy Purse, or the special privileges given to former princes. Morarji Desai was the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister. On both the above issues, serious differences emerged between him and the Prime Minister, resulting in Desai leaving the government. Congress had seen differences of this kind in the past. But this time both the parties wanted a showdown, which took place during the presidential elections. The then Congress President S. Nijalingappa issued a whip, asking all the Congress MPs and MLAs to vote in favor of Sanjeeva Reddy, the official candidate of the party. Supporters of Indira Gandhi requisitioned a special meeting of the AICC, that is why this faction came to be known as requisitionists, but this was refused. After silently supporting V.V. Giri, the Prime Minister openly called for a conscience vote, which meant that the MPs and MLAs from the Congress should be free to vote the way they want. The election ultimately resulted in the victory of V.V. Giri, the independent candidate, and the defeat of Sanjeeva Reddy, the official Congress candidate. The defeat of the official Congress candidate formalized the split in the party. The Congress president expelled the Prime Minister from the party. She claimed that her group was the real Congress. By November 1969, the Congress group led by the syndicate came to be referred to as the Congress Organization, and the group led by Indira Gandhi came to be called the Congress Requisitionists. These two parties were also described as Old Congress and New Congress. Indira Gandhi projected the split as an ideological divide between socialists and conservatives, between the pro-poor and the pro-rich. Abolition of Privy Purse. In Chapter 1 you have read about the integration of the princely states. This integration was preceded by an assurance that after the dissolution of princely rule, the then rulers' families would be allowed to retain certain private property, and given a grant in heredity or government allowance, measured on the basis of the extent, revenue and potential of the merging state. This grant was called the Privy Purse. At the time of accession, there was little criticism of these privileges since integration and consolidation was the primary aim. Yet, hereditary privileges were not consonant with the principles of equality and social and economic justice laid down in the Constitution of India. Nehru had expressed his dissatisfaction over the matter time and again. Following the 1967 elections, Indira Gandhi supported the demand that the government should abolish privy purses. Morarji Desai, however, called the move morally wrong and amounting to a breach of faith with the princes. The government tried to bring a constitutional amendment in 1970, but it was not passed in Rajya Sabha. It then issued an ordinance which was struck down by the Supreme Court. Indira Gandhi made this into a major election issue in 1971 and got a lot of public support. Following its massive victory in the 1971 election, the constitution was amended to remove legal obstacles for abolition of privy purse. The 1971 election and restoration of Congress. The split in the Congress reduced Indira Gandhi government to a minority. Yet her government continued in office with the issue-based support of a few other parties including the Communist Party of India and the DMK. During this period the government made conscious attempts to project its socialist credentials. This was also a phase when Indira Gandhi vigorously campaigned for implementing the existing land reform laws and undertook further land ceiling legislation. In order to end her dependence on other political parties, strengthen her party's position in the parliament, and seek a popular mandate for her programs, Indira Gandhi's government recommended the dissolution of the Lok Sabha in December 1970. This was another surprising and bold move. The fifth general election to Lok Sabha were held in February 1971. The contest. The electoral contest appeared to be loaded against Congress. After all, the new Congress was just one faction of an already weak party. Everyone believed that the real organizational strength of the Congress party was under the command of Congress. To make matters worse for Indira Gandhi, all the major non-communist, non-Congress opposition parties formed an electoral alliance known as the Grand Alliance. The SSP, PSP, Bharatiya Jana Sangh, Swatantra Party and the Bharatiya Kranti Dal came together under this umbrella. The ruling party had an alliance with the CPI. Yet the new Congress had something that its big opponents lacked: it had an issue, an agenda and a positive slogan. The Grand Alliance did not have a coherent political program. Indira Gandhi said that the opposition alliance had only one common program: Indira Hatao, remove Indira. In contrast to this, she put forward a positive program captured in the famous slogan, Garibi Hatao, remove poverty. She focused on the growth of the public sector, imposition of ceiling on rural land holdings and urban property, removal of disparities in income and opportunity, and abolition of princely privileges. Through Garibi Hatao, Indira Gandhi tried to generate a support base among the disadvantaged, especially among the landless laborers, Dalits and Adivasis, minorities, women and the unemployed youth. The slogan of Garibi Hatao and the programs that followed it were part of Indira Gandhi's political strategy of building an independent nationwide political support base. The outcome and after. The results of the Lok Sabha elections of 1971 were as dramatic as was the decision to hold these elections. The Congress CPI alliance won more seats and votes than the Congress had ever won in the first four general elections. The combined 375 won seats in Lok Sabha and secured 48.4% votes. Indira Gandhi's Congress 352 won seats with about 44% of the popular votes on its own. Contrast this with the performance of the Congress the party with so many stalwarts could get less than 1/4 of the votes secured by Indira Gandhi's party and win merely 16 seats. With this, the Congress Party led by Indira Gandhi established its claim to being the real Congress and restored to it the dominant position in Indian politics. The Grand Alliance of the opposition proved a grand failure. Their combined tally of seats was less than 40. Soon after the 1971 Lok Sabha elections, a major political and military crisis broke out in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. As you have read in Chapter 4, the 1971 elections were followed by the crisis in East Pakistan and the Indo-Pak War leading to the establishment of Bangladesh. These events added to the popularity of Indira Gandhi. Even the opposition leaders admired her statesmanship. Her party swept through all the state assembly elections held in 1972. She was seen not only as the protector of the poor and the underprivileged, but also a strong nationalist leader. The opposition to her, either within the party or outside of it, simply did not matter. With two successive election victories, one at the center and other at the state level, the dominance of the Congress was restored. The Congress was now in power in almost all the states. It was also popular across different social sections. Within a span of 4 years, Indira Gandhi had warded off the challenge to her leadership and to the dominant position of the Congress Party. Restoration. But does it mean that the Congress system was restored? What Indira Gandhi had done was not a revival of the old Congress Party. In many ways she had reinvented the party. The party occupied a similar position in terms of its popularity as in the past. But it was a different kind of a party. It relied entirely on the popularity of the supreme leader. It had a somewhat weak organizational structure. This Congress Party now did not have many factions, thus it could not accommodate all kinds of opinions and interests. While it won elections, it depended more on some social groups, the poor, the women, Dalits, Adivasis and the minorities. This was a new Congress that had emerged. Thus, Indira Gandhi restored the Congress system by changing the nature of the Congress system itself. Despite being more popular, the new Congress did not have the kind of capacity to absorb all tensions and conflicts that the Congress system was known for. While the Congress consolidated its position and Indira Gandhi assumed a position of unprecedented political authority, the spaces for democratic expression of people's aspirations actually shrank. The popular unrest and mobilization around issues of development and economic deprivation continued to grow. In the next chapter you will read about how this led to a political crisis that threatened the very existence of constitutional democracy in the country. Important personalities. 1. Lal Bahadur Shastri, 1904–1966, Prime Minister of India, participated in the freedom movement since 1930, Minister in UP Cabinet, General Secretary of Congress, Minister in Union Cabinet from 1951 to 1956 when he resigned taking responsibility for the railway accident and later from 1957 to 1964 coined the famous slogan, Jai Jawan Jai Kisan. 2. Indira Gandhi, 1917–1984, Prime Minister of India from 1966 to 1977 and 1980 to 1984, daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, participated in the freedom struggle as a young Congress worker, Congress President in 1958, Minister in Shastri's cabinet from 1964–66, led the Congress Party to victory in 1967, 1971 and 1980 general elections, credited with the slogan, Garibi Hatao, victory in 1971 war and for policy initiatives like abolition of Privy Purse, nationalization of banks, nuclear test and environmental protection. Assassinated on 31 October 1984. 3. C. Natarajan Annadurai, 1909–1969, Chief Minister of Madras, Tamil Nadu, from 1967, a journalist, popular writer and orator, initially associated with the Justice Party in Madras Province, later joined Dravid Kazhagam, 1934, formed DMK as a political party in 1949, a proponent of Dravid culture, he was opposed to imposition of Hindi and led the anti-Hindi agitations, supporter of greater autonomy to states. 4. Ram Manohar Lohia, 1910–1967, socialist leader and thinker, freedom fighter and among the founders of the Congress Socialist Party. After the split in the parent party, the leader of the Socialist Party and later the Samyukta Socialist Party, member, Lok Sabha, 1963–67, founder-editor of Mankind and Jan, known for original contribution to a non-European socialist theory, as political leader, best known for sharp attacks on Nehru, strategy of non-Congressism, advocacy of reservation for backward castes and opposition to English. 5. K. Kamaraj, 1903–1975, freedom fighter and Congress President, Chief Minister of Madras, Tamil Nadu, having suffered educational deprivation, made efforts to spread education in Madras province, introduced midday meal scheme for schoolchildren. In 1963 he proposed that all senior congressmen should resign from office to make way for younger party workers. This proposal is famous as the Kamaraj Plan. 6. V.V. Giri, 1894–1980, President of India from 1969 to 1974, Congress worker and Labour leader from Andhra Pradesh, Indian High Commissioner to Ceylon, Sri Lanka, Labour Minister in Union Cabinet, Governor of UP, Kerala, Mysore, Karnataka, Vice President, 1967–1969, and acting President after the death of President Zakir Hussain, resigned and contested presidential election as independent candidate, received support from Indira Gandhi for his election as president. 7. Karpuri Thakur, 1924–1988, Chief Minister of Bihar between December 1970 and June 1971 and again between June 1977 and April 1979, freedom fighter and socialist leader, active in labor and peasant movements, staunch follower of Lohia, participated in the movement led by J.P., known for his decision to introduce reservations for the backward classes in Bihar during his second chief ministership, strong opponent of the use of English language. 8. S. Nijalingappa, 1902–2000, Senior Congress Leader, Member of Constituent Assembly, Member of Lok Sabha, Chief Minister of the then Mysore, Karnataka, state, regarded as the maker of modern Karnataka, President of Congress during 1968–71. Quotes. 1. New Prime Minister of India, in spite of all forebodings, had been named with more dispatch, and much more dignity, than was the new Prime Minister of Britain. Editorial in The Guardian, London, 3 June 1964, comparing the political succession after Nehru with the succession drama after Harold Macmillan in Britain. 2. In India, as present trends continue, maintenance of an ordered structure of society is going to slip out of reach of an ordered structure of civil government, and the army will be only alternative source of authority and order. The great experiment of developing India within a democratic framework has failed. Neville Maxwell, India's Disintegrating Democracy, an article published in the London Times, 1967. Let us watch a film. Zanjeer. Vijay, a young police officer, is framed in false charges and sent to jail while fighting gangsters. Released from jail, Vijay is determined to take revenge. He fights all odds and vanquishes the villains. Even while he is engaged in taking revenge, Vijay is fighting the antisocial element and gets the tacit support of many others from within the system. This film portrayed the erosion of moral values and the deep frustrations arising quite forcefully. It represents the indifference of the system and the harsh and volcanic eruption of protest through the anger of Vijay. The film set the trend of what was later to be known as the angry young man of the 70s. Year, 1973. Director, Prakash Mehra. Screenplay, Javed Akhtar. Cast, Amitabh Bachchan, Ajit. Jaya Baduri, Pran. Chapter 6. The Crisis of Democratic Order. In this chapter, we have seen in the last chapter that the Congress recovered after 1971, but was not the same kind of party. The difference became clear in a series of events between 1973 and 1975 that brought new challenges to India's democratic politics and the institutional balance sought by the Constitution. These developments led to the imposition of emergency in June 1975. Normally, we would associate emergency with war and aggression or with natural disaster. But this emergency was imposed because of the perceived threat of internal disturbance. The emergency ended as dramatically as it had begun, resulting in a defeat of the Congress in the Lok Sabha elections of 1977. In this chapter we focus on this crucial phase in the history of democracy in India and ask some questions that have remained controversial after all these years. 1. Why was emergency imposed? Was it necessary? 2. What did the imposition of emergency mean in practice? 3. What were the consequences of emergency on party politics? 4. What are the lessons of emergency for Indian democracy? Background to emergency. We have already studied the changes that were taking place in Indian politics since 1967. Indira Gandhi had emerged as a towering leader with tremendous popularity. This was also the period when party competition became bitter and polarized. This period also witnessed tensions in the relationship between the government and the judiciary. The Supreme Court found many initiatives of the government to be violative of the Constitution. The Congress Party took the position that this stand of the court was against principles of democracy and parliamentary supremacy. The Congress also alleged that the court was a conservative institution and it was becoming an obstacle in the way of implementing pro-poor welfare programs. The parties opposed to the Congress felt that politics was becoming too personalized and that governmental authority was being converted into personal authority. The split in the Congress had sharpened the divisions between Indira Gandhi and her opponents. Economic context. In the elections of 1971, Congress had given the slogan of Garibi Hatao, remove poverty. However, the social and economic condition in the country did not improve much after 1971-72. The Bangladesh crisis had put a heavy strain on India's economy. About 8 million people crossed over the East Pakistan border into India. This was followed by war with Pakistan. After the war, the U.S. government stopped all aid to India. In the international market, oil prices increased manifold during this period. This led to an all-round increase in prices of commodities. Prices increased by 23% in 1973 and 30% in 1974. Such a high level of inflation caused much hardship to the people. Industrial growth was low and unemployment was very high, particularly in the rural areas. In order to reduce expenditure, the government froze the salaries of its employees. This caused further dissatisfaction among government employees. Monsoons failed in 1972-1973. This resulted in a sharp decline in agricultural productivity. Food grain output declined by 8%. There was a general atmosphere of dissatisfaction with the prevailing economic situation all over the country. In such a context, non-Congress opposition parties were able to organize popular protests effectively. Instances of students' unrests that had persisted from the late 1960s became more pronounced in this period. There was also an increase in the activities of Marxist groups who did not believe in parliamentary politics. These groups had taken to arms and insurgent techniques for the overthrow of the capitalist order and the established political system. Known as the Marxist-Leninist, now Maoist groups or Naxalites, they were particularly strong in West Bengal, where the state government took stringent measures to suppress them. Gujarat and Bihar movements. Students' protests in Gujarat and Bihar, both of which were Congress-ruled states, had far-reaching impact on the politics of the two states and national politics. In January 1974, students in Gujarat started an agitation against rising prices of food grains, cooking oil and other essential commodities, and against corruption in high places. The students' protest was joined by major opposition parties and became widespread, leading to the imposition of president's rule in the state. The opposition parties demanded fresh elections to the state legislature. Morarji Desai, a prominent leader of Congress, who was the main rival of Indira Gandhi when he was in the Congress, announced that he would go on an indefinite fast if fresh elections were not held in the state. Under intense pressure from students, supported by the opposition political parties, assembly elections were held in Gujarat in June 1975. The Congress was defeated in this election. In March 1974, students came together in Bihar to protest against rising prices, food scarcity, unemployment and corruption. After a point they invited Jayaprakash Narayan, JP, who had given up active politics and was involved in social work, to lead the student movement. He accepted it on the condition that the movement will remain non-violent and will not limit itself to Bihar. Thus the students' movement assumed a political character and had national appeal. People from all walks of life now entered the movement. Jayaprakash Narayan demanded the dismissal of the Congress government in Bihar and gave a call for total revolution in the social, economic and political spheres in order to establish what he considered to be true democracy. A series of bans, gheraos, and strikes were organized in protest against the Bihar government. The government, however, refused to resign. The movement was beginning to influence national politics. Jayaprakash Narayan wanted to spread the Bihar movement to other parts of the country. Alongside the agitation led by Jayaprakash Narayan, the employees of the railways gave a call for a nationwide strike. This threatened to paralyze the country. In 1975, JP led a people's march to the parliament. This was one of the largest political rallies ever held in the capital. He was now supported by the non-Congress opposition parties like the Bharatiya Jana Sangh, the Congress, the Bharatiya Lok Dal, the Socialist Party and others. These parties were projecting JP as an alternative to Indira Gandhi. However, there were many criticisms about his ideas and about the politics of mass agitations that he was employing. Both the Gujarat and Bihar agitations were seen as anti-Congress, and rather than opposing the state governments, they were seen as protests against the leadership of Indira Gandhi. She believed that the movement was motivated by personal opposition to her. The Naxalite movement. In 1967, a peasant uprising took place in the Naxalbari police station area of Darjeeling Hills district in West Bengal under the leadership of the local cadres of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. Beginning from the Naxalbari police station, the peasant movement spread to several states of India and came to be referred broadly as the Naxalite movement. In 1969, they broke off from the CPI-M, and a new party, Communist Party, Marxist-Leninist, CPI-ML, was formed under the leadership of Charu Majumdar. It argued that democracy in India was a sham and decided to adopt a strategy of protracted guerrilla warfare in order to lead to a revolution. The Naxalite movement has used force to snatch land from the rich landowners and give it to the poor and the landless. Its supporters advocated the use of violent means to achieve their political goals. In spite of the use of preventive detention and other strong measures adopted by the West Bengal government run by the Congress Party, the Naxalite movement did not come to an end. In later years, it spread to many other parts of the country. The Naxalite movement has by now splintered into various parties and organizations. Some of these parties, like the CPI, ML, Liberation, participate in open, democratic politics. Currently about 75 districts in 9 states are affected by Naxalite violence. Most of these are very backward areas inhabited by Adivasis. In these areas the sharecroppers, undertenants and small cultivators are denied their basic rights with regard to security of tenure or their share in produce, payment of fair wages etc. Forced labor, expropriation of resources by outsiders and exploitation by moneylender are also common in these areas. These conditions lead to the growth of the Naxalite movement. Governments have taken stern measures in dealing with the Naxalite movement. Human rights activists have criticized the government for violating constitutional norm in dealing with the Naxalites. Many thousand people have lost their lives in the violence by the Naxalites and the anti-Naxalite violence by the government. Railway strike of 1974. What would happen when the railways stop running? Not for 1 or 2 days, but for more than a week. Of course, many people would be inconvenienced, but more than that, the economy of the country would come to a halt because goods are transported from one part to another by trains. Do you know that such a thing actually happened in 1974? The National Coordination Committee for Railwaymen's Struggle led by George Fernandez gave a call for nationwide strike by all employees of the railways for pressing their demands related to bonus and service conditions. The government was opposed to these demands. So, the employees of India's largest public sector undertaking went on a strike in May 1974. The strike by the railway employees added to the atmosphere of labor unrest. It also raised issues like rights of the workers and whether employees of essential services should adopt measures like strikes. The government declared the strike illegal. As the government refused to concede the demands of the striking workers, arrested many of their leaders and deployed the Territorial Army to protect railway tracks, the strike had to be called off after 20 days without any settlement. Conflict with judiciary. This was also the period when the government and the ruling party had many differences with the judiciary. Do you remember the discussion about the long-drawn conflict between the parliament and the judiciary? You have studied this last year. 3 constitutional issues. Has Can Parliament abridge the fundamental rights? The Supreme Court said it cannot. Secondly, can the Parliament curtail the right to property by making an amendment? Again, the court said that Parliament cannot amend the Constitution in such a manner that rights are curtailed. Thirdly, the Parliament amended the Constitution saying that it can abridge fundamental rights for giving effect to directive principles. But the Supreme Court rejected this provision also. This led to a crisis as far as the relations between the government and the judiciary were concerned. You may remember that this crisis culminated in the famous Kesavananda Bharati case. In this case, the court gave a decision that there are some basic features of the Constitution and the Parliament cannot amend these features. 2 developments further added to the tension between the judiciary and the executive. Immediately after the Supreme Court decision in 1973 in the Kesavananda Bharati case, a vacancy arose for the post of the Chief Justice of India. It had been a practice to appoint the senior-most judge of the Supreme Court as the Chief Justice. But in 1973, the government set aside the seniority of 3 judges and appointed Justice A.N. Ray as the Chief Justice of India. The appointment became politically controversial because all the 3 judges who were superseded had given rulings against the stand of the government. Thus, constitutional interpretations and political ideologies were getting mixed up rapidly. People close to the Prime Minister started talking of the need for a judiciary and the bureaucracy committed to the vision of the executive and the legislature. The climax of the confrontation was of course the ruling of the High Court declaring Indira Gandhi's election invalid. Declaration of emergency. On 12 June 1975, Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha of the Allahabad High Court passed a judgment declaring Indira Gandhi's election to the Lok Sabha invalid. This order came on an election petition filed by Raj Narain, a socialist leader and a candidate who had contested against her in 1971. The petition challenged the election of Indira Gandhi on the ground that she had used the services of government servants in her election campaign. The judgment of the High Court meant that legally she was no more an MP and therefore could not remain the Prime Minister unless she was once again elected as an MP within 6 months. On June 24, the Supreme Court granted her a partial stay once High Court order till her appeal was decided. She could remain an MP but could not take part in the proceedings of the Lok Sabha. Crisis and response. The stage was now set for a big political confrontation. The opposition political parties led by Jayaprakash Narayan pressed for Indira Gandhi's resignation and organized a massive demonstration in Delhi's Ramlila grounds on 25 June 1975. Jayaprakash announced a nationwide satyagraha for her resignation and asked the army, the police and government employees not to obey illegal and immoral orders. This too threatened to bring the activities of the government to a standstill. The political mood of the country had turned against the Congress, more than ever before. The response of the government was to declare a state of emergency. On 25 June 1975, the government declared that there was a threat of internal disturbances and therefore, it invoked Article 352 of the Constitution. Under the provision of this article, the government could declare a state of emergency on grounds of external threat or a threat of internal disturbances. The government decided that a grave crisis had arisen which made the proclamation of a state of emergency necessary. Technically speaking, this was within the powers of the government, for our Constitution provides for some special powers to the government once an emergency is declared. Once an emergency is proclaimed, the federal distribution of powers remains practically suspended and all the powers are concentrated in the hands of the Union government. Secondly, the government also gets the power to curtail or restrict all or any of the fundamental rights during the emergency. From the wording of the provisions of the Constitution, it is clear that an emergency is seen as an extraordinary condition in which normal democratic politics cannot function. Therefore, special powers are granted to the government. On the night of the 25th of June 1975, the Prime Minister recommended the imposition of emergency to President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed. He issued the proclamation immediately. After midnight, the electricity to all the major newspaper offices was disconnected. In the early morning, a large number of leaders and workers of the opposition parties were arrested. The cabinet was informed about it at a special meeting at 6 a.m. on the 26th of June, after all this had taken place. Consequences. This brought the agitation to an abrupt stop. Strikes were banned, many opposition leaders were put in jail, the political situation became very quiet though tense. Deciding to use its special powers under emergency provisions, the government suspended the freedom of the press. Newspapers were asked to get prior approval for all material to be published. This is known as press censorship. Apprehending social and communal disharmony, the government banned Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, and Jamaat-e-Islami. Protests and strikes and public agitations were also disallowed. Most importantly, under the provisions of emergency, the various fundamental rights of citizens stood suspended, including the right of citizens to move the court for restoring their fundamental rights. The government made extensive use of preventive detention. Under this provision, people are arrested and detained not because they have committed any offense, but on the apprehension that they may commit an offense. Using preventive detention acts, the government made large-scale arrests during the emergency. Arrested political workers could not challenge their arrest through habeas corpus petitions. Many cases were filed in the high courts and the Supreme Court by and on behalf of arrested persons, but the government claimed that it was not even necessary to inform the arrested persons of the reasons and grounds of their arrest. Several high courts gave judgments that even after the declaration of emergency the courts could entertain a writ of habeas corpus filed by a person challenging his/her detention. In April 1976, the Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court overruled the high courts and accepted the government's plea. It meant that during emergency the government could take away the citizens' right to life and liberty. This judgment closed the doors of judiciary for the citizens and is regarded as one of the most controversial judgments of the Supreme Court. There were many acts of dissent and resistance to the emergency. Many political workers who were not arrested in the first wave went underground and organized protests against the government. Newspapers like the Indian Express and the Statesman protested against censorship by leaving blank spaces where news items had been censored. Magazines like the Seminar and the Mainstream chose to close down rather than submit to censorship. Many journalists were arrested for writing against the emergency. Many underground newsletters and leaflets were published to bypass censorship. Kannada writer Shivarama Karanth, awarded with Padma Bhushan, and Hindi writer Fanishwarnath Renu, awarded with Padma Shri, returned their awards in protest against the suspension of democracy. By and large, though, such open acts of defiance and resistance were rare. The parliament also brought in many new changes to the constitution. In the background of the ruling of the Allahabad High Court in the Indira Gandhi case, an amendment was made declaring that elections of Prime Minister, President and Vice President could not be challenged in the court. The 42nd Amendment was also passed during the emergency. You have already studied that this amendment consisted of a series of changes in many parts of the Constitution. Among the various changes made by this amendment, one was that the duration of the legislatures in the country was extended from 5 to 6 years. This change was not only for the emergency period, but was intended to be of a permanent nature. Besides this, during an emergency, elections can be postponed by 1 year. Thus, effectively, after 1971, elections needed to be held only in 1978, instead of 1976. Controversies regarding emergency. Emergency is one of the most controversial episodes in Indian politics. One reason is that there are differing viewpoints about the need to declare emergency. Another reason is that using the powers given by the Constitution, the government practically suspended the democratic functioning. As the investigations by the Shah Commission after the emergency found out, there were many excesses committed during the emergency. Finally, there are varying assessments of what the lessons of emergency are for the practice of democracy in India. Let us look at these one by one. Was the emergency necessary? The Constitution simply mentioned internal disturbances as the reason for declaring emergency. Before 1975, emergency was never proclaimed on this ground. We have noted that agitations were going on in many parts of the country. Was this reason enough for declaring emergency? The government argued that in a democracy, the opposition parties must allow the elected ruling party to govern according to its policies. It felt that frequent recourse to agitations, protests and collective action are not good for democracy. Supporters of Indira Gandhi also held that in a democracy, you cannot continuously have extra-parliamentary politics targeting the government. This leads to instability and distracts the administration from its routine task of ensuring development. All energies are diverted to maintenance of law and order. Indira Gandhi wrote in a letter to the Shah Commission that subversive forces were trying to obstruct the progressive programs of the government and were attempting to dislodge her from power through extra-constitutional means. Some other parties, like the CPI that continued to back the Congress during the emergency, also believed that there was an international conspiracy against the unity of India. It believed that in such circumstances some restrictions on agitations were justified. The CPI felt that the agitations led by JP were mainly by the middle classes who were opposed to the radical policies of the Congress Party. After the emergency, the CPI felt that its assessment was mistaken and that it was an error to have supported the emergency. On the other hand, the critics of the emergency argued that ever since the freedom movement, Indian politics had a history of popular struggles. JP and many other opposition leaders felt that in a democracy, people had the right to publicly protest against the government. The Bihar and Gujarat agitations were mostly peaceful and nonviolent. Those who were arrested were never tried for any anti-national activity. No cases were registered against most of the detainees. The Home Ministry, which is entrusted with the responsibility of monitoring the internal situation of the country, also did not express any concern about the law and order situation in the country. If some agitations had overstepped their limits, the government had enough routine powers to deal with it. There was no need to suspend democratic functioning and use draconian measures like the emergency for that. The threat was not to the unity and integrity of the country but to the ruling party and to the Prime Minister herself. The critics say that Indira Gandhi misused a constitutional provision meant for saving the country to save her personal power. What happened during emergency? The actual implementation of the emergency is another contentious issue. Did the government misuse its emergency powers? Were there excesses and abuse of authority? The government said that it wanted to use the emergency to bring law and order, restore efficiency, and above all, implement the pro-poor welfare programs. For this purpose, the government led by Indira Gandhi announced a 20-point program and declared its determination to implement this program. The 20-point program included land reforms, land redistribution, review of agricultural wages, workers' participation in management, eradication of bonded labor, etc. In the initial months after the declaration of emergency, the urban middle classes were generally happy over the fact that agitations came to an end and discipline was enforced on the government employees. The poor and rural people also expected effective implementation of the welfare programs that the government was promising. Thus, different sections of society had different expectations from the emergency and also different viewpoints about it. Critics of emergency point out that most of these promises by the government remained unfulfilled, that these were simply meant to divert attention from the excesses that were taking place. They question the use of preventive detention on such a large scale. We have noted that many prominent political leaders were arrested. In all, 676 opposition leaders were arrested. The Shah Commission estimated that nearly 111,000 people were arrested under preventive detention laws. Severe restrictions were put on the press, sometimes without proper legal sanctions. The Shah Commission report mentions that the general manager of the Delhi Power Supply Corporation received verbal orders from the office of the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi to cut electricity to all newspaper presses at 2 a.m. on 26 June 1975. Electricity was restored 2 to 3 days later after the censorship apparatus had been set up. There were other and more serious allegations regarding the exercise of governmental power by people who held no official position. Sanjay Gandhi, the Prime Minister's younger son, did not hold any official position at the time. Yet, he gained control over the administration and allegedly interfered in the functioning of the government. His role in the demolitions and forced sterilization in Delhi became very controversial. Apart from the arrests of political workers and the restrictions on the press, the emergency directly affected lives of common people in many cases. Torture and custodial deaths occurred during the emergency. Arbitrary relocation of poor people also took place. An over-enthusiasm about population control led to cases of compulsory sterilization. These instances show what happens when the normal democratic process is suspended. Lessons of the emergency. The emergency at once brought out both the weaknesses and the strengths of India's democracy. Though there are many observers who think that India ceased to be democratic during the emergency, it is noteworthy that normal democratic functioning resumed within a short span of time. Thus, one lesson of emergency is that it is extremely difficult to do away with democracy in India. Secondly, it brought out some ambiguities regarding the emergency provision in the constitution that have been rectified since. Now, internal emergency can be proclaimed only on the grounds of armed rebellion, and it is necessary that the advice to the President to proclaim emergency must be given in writing by the Council of Ministers. Thirdly, the emergency made everyone more aware of the value of civil liberties. The courts, too, have taken an active role after the emergency in protecting the civil liberties of the individuals. This is a response to the inability of the judiciary to protect civil liberties effectively during the emergency. Many civil liberties organizations came up after this experience. However, the critical years of emergency brought many issues that have not been adequately grappled with. We have noted in this chapter that there is a tension between routine functioning of a democratic government and the continuous political protests by parties and groups. What is the correct balance between the two? Should the citizens have full freedom to engage in protest activity, or should they have no such right at all? What are the limits to such a protest? Secondly, the actual implementation of the emergency rule took place through the police and the administration. These institutions could not function independently. They were turned into political instruments of the ruling party, and according to the Shah Commission report, the administration and the police became vulnerable to political pressures. This problem did not vanish after the emergency. Politics after emergency. The most valuable and lasting lesson of the emergency was learnt as soon as the emergency was over and the Lok Sabha elections were announced. The 1977 elections turned into a referendum on the experience of the emergency, at least in North India, where the impact of the emergency was felt most strongly. The opposition fought the election on the slogan of "Save Democracy." The people's verdict was decisively against the emergency. The lesson was clear and has been reiterated in many state-level elections thereafter. Governments that are perceived to be anti-democratic are severely punished by the voters. In this sense, the experience of 1975–77 ended up strengthening the foundations of democracy in India. Lok Sabha elections, 1977. In January 1977, after 18 months of emergency, the government decided to hold elections. Accordingly, all the leaders and activists were released from jails. Elections were held in March 1977. This left the opposition with very little time, but political developments took place very rapidly. The major opposition parties had already been coming closer in the pre-emergency period. Now they came together on the day of the elections and formed a new party, known as the Janata Party. The new party accepted the leadership of Jayaprakash Narayan. Some leaders of the Congress who were opposed to the emergency also joined this new party. Some other Congress leaders also came out and formed a separate party under the leadership of Jagjeevan Ram. This party, named as Congress for Democracy, later merged with the Janata Party. The Janata Party made this election into a referendum on the emergency. Its campaign was focused on the non-democratic character of the rule and on the various excesses that took place during this period. In the backdrop of arrests of thousands of persons and the censorship of the press, the public opinion was against the Congress. Jayaprakash Narayan became the popular symbol of restoration of democracy. The formation of the Janata Party also ensured that non-Congress votes would not be divided. It was evident that the going was tough for the Congress. Yet the final results took everyone by surprise. For the first time since independence, the Congress Party was defeated in the Lok Sabha elections. The Congress could win only 154 seats in the Lok Sabha. Its share of popular votes fell to less than 35%. The Janata Party and its allies 331 out of the 542 seats in the Lok Sabha, Janata Party itself 295 won seats and thus enjoyed a clear majority. In North India, it was a massive electoral wave against the Congress. The Congress lost in every constituency in Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, Haryana and the Punjab and could win only one seat each in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. Indira Gandhi was defeated from Rai Bareli, as was her son Sanjay Gandhi from Amethi. But if you look at the map showing the result of this election, you will notice that Congress did not lose elections all over the country. It retained many seats in Maharashtra, Gujarat and Orissa and virtually swept through the southern states. There are many reasons for this. To begin with, the impact of emergency was not felt equally in all the states. The forced relocation and displacements, the forced sterilizations, were mostly concentrated in the northern states. But more importantly, North India had experienced some long-term changes in the nature of political competition. The middle castes from North India were beginning to move away from the Congress and the Janata Party became a platform for many of these sections to come together. In this sense, the elections of 1977 were not merely about the emergency. Janata government. The Janata Party government that came to power after the 1977 elections was far from cohesive. After the election, there was stiff competition among three leaders for the post of Prime Minister Morarji Desai, who was the rival to Indira Gandhi ever since 1966–67, Charan Singh, leader of the Bharatiya Lok Dal and a farmers' leader from UP, and Jagjeevan Ram, who had vast experience as a senior minister in the Congress governments. Eventually Morarji Desai became the prime minister, but that did not bring the power struggle within the party to an end. The opposition to emergency could keep the Janata Party together only for a while. Its critics felt that the Janata Party lacked direction, leadership, and a common program. The Janata Party government could not bring about a fundamental change in policies from those pursued by the Congress. The Janata Party split and the government, which was led by Morarji Desai, lost its majority in less than 18 months. Another government headed by Charan Singh was formed on the assurance of the support of the Congress Party. But the Congress Party later decided to withdraw its support, with the result that the Charan Singh government could remain in power for just about 4 months. Fresh Lok Sabha elections were held in January 1980, in which the Janata Party suffered a comprehensive defeat, especially in North India where it had swept the polls in 1977. Congress Party led by Indira Gandhi nearly repeated its great victory in 1971. It 353 won seats and came back to power. The experience of 1977–79 taught another lesson in democratic politics: governments that are seen to be unstable and quarrelsome are severely punished by the voters. Legacy. But was it only a case of return of Indira Gandhi? Between the elections of 1977 and 1980, the party system had changed dramatically. Since 1969, the Congress Party had started shedding its character as an umbrella party which accommodated leaders and workers of different ideological dispensations and viewpoints. The Congress Party now identified itself with a particular ideology, claiming to be the only socialist and pro-poor party. Thus, with the early 1970s, the Congress's political success depended on attracting people on the basis of sharp social and ideological divisions and the appeal of one leader, Indira Gandhi. With the change in the nature of the Congress Party, other opposition parties relied more and more on what is known in Indian politics as non-Congressism. They also realized the need to avoid a division of non-Congress votes in the election. This factor played a major role in the elections of 1977. In an indirect manner, the issue of welfare of the backward castes also began to dominate politics since 1977. As we saw above, the results of 1977 elections were at least partly due to a shift among the backward castes of North India. Following the Lok Sabha elections, many states also held assembly elections in 1977. Again, the northern states elected non-Congress governments in which the leaders of the backward castes played an important role. The issue of reservations for other backward classes became very controversial in Bihar, and following this, the Mandal Commission was appointed by the Janata Party government at the center. You will read more about this and about the role of the politics of backward castes in the last chapter. The elections after the emergency set off the process of this change in the party system. The emergency and the period around it can be described as a period of constitutional crisis because it had its origins in the constitutional battle over the jurisdiction of the parliament and the judiciary. On the other hand, it was also a period of political crisis. The party in power had absolute majority, and yet, its leadership decided to suspend the democratic process. The makers of India's constitution trusted that all political parties would basically abide by the democratic norm. Even during the emergency, when the government would use extraordinary powers, its use would be within the norms of the rule of law. This expectation led to the wide and open-ended powers given to the government in times of emergency. These were abused during the emergency. This political crisis was more serious than the constitutional crisis. Another critical issue that emerged during this period was the role and extent of mass protests in a parliamentary democracy. There was clearly a tension between institution-based democracy and democracy based on spontaneous popular participation. This tension may be attributed to the inability of the party system to incorporate the aspirations of the people. In the 2 chapters that follow, we shall study some of the manifestations of this tension, in particular, popular movements and debates around regional identity. Important personalities. 1. Charu Majumdar, 1918–1972, communist revolutionary and the leader of the Naxalbari uprising, participated in the Tebaga movement before independence, left the CPI and founded the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist, believed in the Maoist path of peasant rebellion and defended revolutionary violence, died in police custody. 2. Loknayak Jayaprakash Narayan, J.P., 1902–1979, a Marxist in his youth, founder General Secretary of the Congress Socialist Party and the Socialist Party, a hero of the 1942 Quit India movement, declined to join Nehru's cabinet, after 1955 quit active politics, became a Gandhian and was involved in the Bhutan movement, negotiations with the Naga rebels, peace initiative in Kashmir, and ensured the surrender of dacoits in Chambal, leader of Bihar movement. He became the symbol of opposition to emergency and was the moving force behind the formation of Janata Party. 3. Morarji Desai, 1896–1995, freedom fighter, a Gandhian leader, proponent of khadi, naturopathy and prohibition, Chief Minister of Bombay State, Deputy Prime Minister, 1967–1969, joined Congress, after the split in the party, Prime Minister from 1977 to 1979, first Prime Minister belonging to a non-Congress party. Let us watch a film. Hazaaron Khwaishein Aisi. Siddharth, Vikram and Geeta are 3 spirited and socially engaged students. Graduating from Delhi, they follow different paths. While Siddharth is a strong supporter of the revolutionary ideology of social transformation, Vikram is in favor of achieving success in life, whatever the cost. The film narrates the story of their journeys towards their goals and the underlying disappointments. The film is set in the backdrop of the 70s. The young characters are products of the expectations and idealism of that period. Siddharth is not successful in his ambition to stage a revolution, but is so involved in the plight of the poor that he begins valuing their uplift more than revolution. On the other hand, Vikram becomes a typical political fixer but is constantly ill at ease. Year 2005. Director, Sudhir Mishra. Screenplay, Sudhir Mishra. Ruchi Narain. Shivkumar Subramaniam. Cast, K. Menon, Shini. Ahuja, Chitrangada Singh. Emergency-related incidents. Shah Commission of Inquiry. In May 1977, the Janata Party government appointed a commission of inquiry headed by Justice J.C. Shah, retired Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India, to inquire into several aspects of allegations of abuse of authority, excesses and malpractices committed and action taken in the wake of the emergency proclaimed on 25 June 1975. The commission examined various kinds of evidence and called scores of witnesses to give testimonies. These included Indira Gandhi, who appeared before the commission but refused to answer any questions. The Government of India accepted the findings, observations and recommendations